All right, we're recording, and I want points for being kind and not starting the recording while Laura was in the middle of a sentence.
Yes. However,
I want points.
you totally get points, but then I have to take them away because you didn't tell me you were going to turn on the recording 5 times before you turn the recording on like you usually do.
It's
So
true.
so you're starting at a base of even, which is still further ahead than where you usually start.
Nice. Excellent.
So
Yeah,
good.
the other podcast I do, the tacos podcast, just came for the tacos. Lee teases me because I will talk to her for like 4 minutes about nothing before I hit record. And I'm always like, I'm sorry, I'm just jabbering about nothing. She's like, yeah, I understand you need to get your anxiety out before you hit record. I really do. I've like pushed through the anxiety before I hit before we go on mic.
I
Anyway,
mean, you've done this at least 150 times for Dialogue Doctor.
yeah.
And what, you're at 20 or so with tacos?
Yeah, I'm like 20 something with tacos. And I've
And
probably guessed it. I haven't counted them recently, but I bet I'm at over 50 podcasts I've guessed it on.
okay. So you're at 225 podcasts. When does the nervousness and anxiety go
Never. The
away?
anxiety never goes away.
So this
Never.
reminds me of that scene in The Cutting Edge where he says that he had two helmets, one for the game and
Yeah,
one
when I'm
for
puking.
the game.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep,
hmm
that's you. That's
hmm
you.
Yeah. Yeah, I am a game time puker. Um, okay, we're doing a Q&A today.
Yay.
Yay.
And just for the people who are listening and can't see us, we color coordinated today.
We That's really funny. We're wearing the same shirt. I actually had a different shirt on, and then I was doing repairs in the kitchen that were not successful, but I was like drenched in sweat, so I had to change
Mhm.
shirts right before I came on. So maybe it was subconscious because I saw you earlier this morning. Did you have
That's
that shirt
true.
on earlier this
I
morning?
think so.
Okay. So
I'm
it's
gonna go
probably
with yes.
subconscious. Nice. Yeah, so it's probably subconscious. I was probably like subconsciously, I was like, grab that shirt. You'll match Laura. Yeah. Uh okay, let's talk about we got a couple not a lot of questions today. We might be a short episode today.
Oh, well, we
Um
say that, but even with just a few questions,
we haven't gotten letters in a long time. We every time we did one of these, we used to get letters about you and I like jabbering on too long about random things. We haven't gotten one of those in a while. So maybe we can earn one back today. Um
I mean, we can try.
we can work on it.
You can keep trying to
We can
ask
work
these
on it.
questions, and I can keep distracting you because the first question is the one that I always have the most trouble with.
You don't know what question I'm going to ask first. I could jump around.
Okay, jump
I'm not
around.
jumping around. No, that's chaos. That's
Yes, but
chaos.
we did it in our last podcast, the last Q&A. We had the list of like 20 questions, and we picked the one question for the other person, and we went randomly.
We
You think
did.
that's
You're
cool? We
right.
did.
Because we had so many questions, but we don't have that many questions this time, so we
That's
don't
true.
get.
We both have to answer both. I can't.
All
I
right.
can't.
What's the best story you've engaged with recently?
This is the best
See, I
story.
just asked
I
it. I
know.
just asked it without you.
You
Yeah.
just, yeah. This you're making up for not telling me 5 times you're going to turn the podcast on.
Oh man.
Okay, so the best story.
And
uh,
why?
well, obviously, I'm not just
Okay.
going to. I'm not just going to say Ted Lasso and just like leave it there.
And
Though
I'm
I
done.
can just say Ted Lasso and just leave it there because anyone who has seen Ted Lasso understands that
Yeah, I still refuse to pay for Apple, so I haven't seen it yet.
it's totally worth it.
I've been told.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's definitely it's so worth it. And if you're watching if you have Apple, you can also watch Shrinking,
Yeah.
which is also phenomenal
With Indiana Jones.
with Harrison Ford.
Yeah. They're the same.
Yeah, no, it's that's fantastic as well. Um, Jason has really gotten into What We Do in the Shadows.
Guillermo.
Yes. And
Baby
at
Cullen
first,
Robinson. Sorry.
right? At first I was very like, oh, this is going to be another one of Jason's shows that I'm going to watch.
The
And I can
best.
say this because he never listens to the podcast. I was very like, okay, I'll just watch it, and like was humoring him when I was watching it. But the more that we've watched, the more engaged I've become with the story and the characters. And I really, and what I like best about it is the character development that they've got going on, because they've got these, for anyone who hasn't watched it, it's weird and crazy, and it's from FX. Um, it's the
It is. Go ahead. Sorry, I was going to give a brief overview of the story for
that's
people who haven't
that's
watched
what I
it.
was that's what I was about to do.
Go for it. Sorry.
It's three vampires who live in a house together, and the house is a piece of crap.
It's
And
four
it's four
vampires.
well, it's three traditional vampires and a energy vampire who is like, picture the most boring person you have ever met in your life, who just talks and talks and talks. That is an energy vampire. The more they talk and the more boring they are, the more energy they are sapping from you. He can walk during the daytime, but he even does it to the vampires. So
Mhm.
and then they have a familiar who is a human who takes care of them. And what I like best about the show is his character arc, because the vampires are all like 700 years old, except for the energy vampire who's 100 years old. Um, or is he?
Maybe it's a
Right?
question.
It's,
Season three, it becomes a question.
yep, yep. So Guillermo, who's the familiar, is really the only one who has like a human character arc, but the others also have like growth, and it's very interesting. They do
Is it growth or is it a circle?
well. I mean, they're
They
700,
go through
so
circles.
so that is the story that I have engaged with recently.
Nice. I love that show so much. It is I think it's again, it's like the cast pairing, like just getting
Mm,
the right like different personality types in the cast is
hmm.
so good. I don't think I'd watch it without Colin Robinson, the energy vampire. He's my favorite. He's the first episode where he's in the office and he's like, "Hey, I want to go back to." He's looking over this guy's shoulder who's working, and he goes, "Hey, I just want to go back to the whole Q-tip in the ear debate. I just don't think that it's a good idea to put anything in your ear bigger." And you see the guy like start to go to sleep at his keyboard. It's the best.
They do something really
Oh,
fun with him in season 4.
is that
So
the one that's playing right now?
no, season 6 just started.
Okay. See,
This
I don't
last
know. I've
season.
watched all of them.
No.
I don't know what season
So,
happens.
yeah, I don't
Yeah,
wanna give it
he has a
away in case
massive growth
somebody.
arc in whatever the second to last season was,
Yeah.
the season before this one. Yeah, it's really great.
Try and call it a growth arc, but they did something really good with this character.
It was amazing. Um, yeah,
What
that man, I don't know that I can top that. That's a great story you've engaged with. It's
I mean,
fantastic.
you did read a great short story for this morning's dialogue,
We did. If you're
Dr.
part of
Group.
the Patreon group, twice a month, we have a Zoom meetup where we like either we engage in some kind of story. We either read a book or we read a short story or we watch a movie and like diagnose like, hey, why does this work? Why do people love this story? And today we read Hodgins, a killer is hard to find. Tiger fighter. A tiger fighter is hard to find. And I enjoyed it. It's a dark comedy. They compare it to Flannery O'Connor, which I actually think is an apt comparison because it's one of
Mhm.
those stories where like the premise and the like not the premise is mundane. People are making a movie.
I don't know that I would call the premise
Okay,
Monday.
people have made a movie and somebody wants them to improve it. That's the premise. But then
That's the
as
backstory.
that's the back, that's like the inciting incident. That's
Yes,
like, hey,
yes.
here's what we have to do. And then the way the story walks out logically, like they just keep making decisions that are like, wait, what did you do? And it's that kind of, gothic absurdism, southern gothic absurdism. And it was great. I liked it.
You really enjoyed it.
I really did. I was laughing really hard. I was the only one on the call laughing. Um, so which makes me worry about
Again,
myself.
I think you and I have a very different sense of humor. I mean, going back to the Kimmy Schmidt
Oh my
example,
gosh, Kimmy Schmidt is great. Titus Andromedon all day.
no,
Um,
couldn't do it.
all day. Uh, yeah, we meet up on what we do in the shadows though, which is interesting. I have been so a good story I've engaged with. I have been reading probably for a month every night before I go to bed. Uh, all I have a Langston Hughes anthology, which is the entire poetry collection of Langston Hughes. It's several thousand pages, and I've just been like chunking through it every day. And it is man, he's one of those writers, like pre-civil rights movement, Jim Crow era writers, a little like Baldwin, I would say, that I know my education was lacking. I didn't have I didn't read any Langston Hughes when I was
Mhm.
growing up. And you know, I read one as I've been reading, I've been reading more about him and being a black man in the Jim Crow era and a poet and kind of fighting for education and moving to Harlem in New York. And there's some scholars that think he was also homosexual, although that's not proven out, I don't think, according to the scholars, but I am not a scholar, so I'm just regurgitating what I've read. So if you are a Langston Hughes scholars, email me and let me know what your take on it is. But his poetry is direct, and I would say often it's like beautifully sticking your finger in a wound. He is putting his finger in the wound of America, but it is over and over and over again. But it is beautiful. And it is one scholar I read called him the father of hip hop because of the way, or they call him jazz poetry because of the way he rhymes words and like creates phrases. It feels like he's rapping when you
Hmm.
read it. It feels like, oh, this is the beginning of rap. And it's not. He's, decades and decades and decades before that, but it feels like and it is, yeah. So Langston Hughes is who I've been engaging with.
Neat.
Yeah, it's really, and I'm very happy that I am. It is a good, and most of the poems are very short. Um, they're like, a 1 minute read. And so it's a nice way to like go to bed is to read this great thinker and writer's thoughts.
Hmm.
Um, I got into it. We did a short story of his for the dialoguers for the Dialogue Doctor community back in March. We did Thank You, Ma'am. Which if you want to read some of his short story work, that one you can find online for free. And it's about a uh African American woman who catches a kid trying to steal her handbag
Mm,
and then takes him home and feeds him and cleans him up and learns about his life and like talks to him about what's going on and then sends him on his way. And it's a beautiful short story. It's
nice.
really great. Yeah.
To go back and read that. That's the one I missed because my mom got sick. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good.
hmm.
Uh yeah, so that's been my that's my best story. Any other good stories you've engaged with recently?
Um, we just watched Silo.
I haven't seen
Um,
that.
I think it's on Apple TV as well. Um, it's based off of a book trilogy that I am hoping to read on vacation.
Nice.
It's about a community that lives underground
Hmm.
and the rules about you can't leave because like the world is poisoned, but anyone who asks to leave is allowed to go outside and to leave, but then they immediately die. There's a
Mm.
camera that faces outside that gets dirty over time. So if you go outside, you're asked to clean the
Clean the
lens.
camera.
Yeah. So the series is called the Silo trilogy. The first one is called Wool. Um,
Okay.
so it's
I've heard of Wool, and I've been
yeah,
told I have to read it, and I
yeah.
have not read it.
So the TV show was fantastic. So I am hoping that the book is equally as engaging. But I also
It
have
has
like,
rabid fans.
yeah, well, I mean, most of those trilogies do.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. Very mainstream. So we will we'll see about that. I also have
Nice.
like 10 or 12 or 50 other books on my read list for this vacation. My vacation isn't that long, but
Yeah.
hopefully I can get at least 2 or 3 in.
Yeah, I'm not done with it yet. I'm reading Dan Lipinski's The Parrot in the Igloo. Um,
The Penguin and the Igloo.
that's the parrot. The Parrot in the Igloo.
Oh, I thought this morning you were talking about the penguin and the igloo.
I might have gotten it wrong.
Okay.
Pretty sure it's the parrot. Let me look while I talk about it.
I'm gonna look. You talk,
Um,
I'll look.
it is a history of climate change. Um, don't let that turn. I know a lot of people are like, I'm not reading that. Don't let that
It
turn you off.
is the parrot.
It's the
I
parrot in
could
the
have
igloo.
sworn this morning you
I
were calling
probably
it the
did say the penguin
penguin.
this morning. Yeah, it is the parrot in the igloo, and it's I just finished the part one. It comes in three parts. It's the inventors, the scientists, and the deniers. And I just read the first part, the inventors, and it was it's nonfiction, so beautifully written. He goes through Edison's journey and Tesla's journey and like kind of the inventing of industrialization. Um, and it's yeah, he gets very personable in a very tight amount of space with characters. His description of Tesla is like 3 paragraphs. And I felt like I knew the man after those 3 paragraphs. I was like, oh, like one of his sentences is that, he fainted at the sight of women with earrings. That sentence tells me so much about that man. I'm like, oh, wow. What a great detail of all the details you had at your fingertips to give me about Tesla. That's an important one that, by the way, I've never heard before. I've read about Tesla before. I've never heard before. And I was like, oh, that is well done by you. So I'm really enjoying it. It's a good book. I think part of what makes it a good nonfiction is that it's character centric. Like it would be very easy for him to just talk about research and talk about numbers and data and all that. But even now, I'm in the scientist portion of it now. Even if he's talking about the scientists, he's like giving you their life. He's engaging you with the individuals. He's talking about who they were. He's talking about like what they found. He has a lot of quotes from Edison to Tesla. I didn't realize that also that the end of Edison's life was a little tragic when it came to his work, which is
Mm,
it's interesting to see these stories play out over time and or that like Tesla sold his patents to Westinghouse kind of for the good of humanity, thinking that Westinghouse would kind of take care of him for the rest of his life, and then ends up, as Westinghouse grows as a corporation, ends up in battles with them over like, hey, you should be taking care of me.
mhm.
So yeah, it's a really great read. I highly recommend it.
Nice.
Okay, something you learned about writing recently or editing in your case.
I
Something you learned
I
about
do
writing
I
or
do like how you turned that around for me. So I will talk about our morning podcast this morning.
editing. Okay.
That because we
We're just
talked,
plugging the community all day. We're like, you
well,
guys should be a part, you could be a part of these
I
conversations.
mean, you can if you want to, but no, what I we talked about the difference between lit fiction and mass market fiction in a way that I had never looked at the distinction before.
Interesting. How's that?
So I always I always move toward mass market fiction because I don't really want to think when I read. I said that on those might have been exactly my words this morning. I don't want to think. I just want to
Yeah.
enjoy the
Yeah. Yeah.
experience. And when I read lit fiction, it's a lot of like staying with the story for the sake of the story, not for the emotional journey that I'm going on.
Yeah.
And we talked about why the authors do that this morning, with the idea of they're creating art to put in the world and they don't necessarily care whether or not people read it. They have a story to tell and they're going to tell it. Whereas the purpose of mass market fiction is to get as many people to buy your book as possible.
Yeah.
So
You
it was
you
kind of cool.
win. How does Joel Solari put it recently on a podcast? Mass market fiction is a winner take all market. So if you, I'm trying to remember who's, I think he might have been on Sasha Black's podcast, the Rebel Author. I can't remember, but it was a win, or it may have been Joanna Penn, the creative Penn. I don't remember whose he was on. Go Google him, you'll find him. But he was talking about how the mass market is the goal. You can't half win it. It's either winner take all or you're a loser. There's no second place is first place loser. He didn't, that's Ricky Bobby.
Mhm.
Joe Solari didn't say that. But yeah, it's that kind of like, it's just a different approach to
No, I think
what you're
Ricky
writing.
Bobby said it. Oh,
That's
no,
what I
no.
said. Yeah.
Ricky Bobby said, if you're
Second
not
place is
first,
first
you're
place loser.
last.
Yeah, he said, yeah. Well, he said both. Second place is first place loser, and if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Because again, like we should be getting all of our life advice from Ricky
from
Bobby.
Ricky Bobby. Yeah, that makes so perfect sense. I don't know what to do with my hands. I can't tell you how often I say that during the day. Um, that was weird. Yeah, so I think that's yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know you hadn't thought about that before.
No, I mean, the whole point of me reading is not to think. I'm not going to think about reading.
It's so funny. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, sorry, I kind of lost my thread of what I've learned recently about writing. I'm writing my first memoir. Um, I've written like fiction that has relation to me, but I'm currently writing my first, like, no, this is a nonfiction memoir. Um, and I've really struggled. There's kind of three threads that have to go, I'm finding. There's the like thread of the theme, the like, this is what I'm talking about. And that has to, in this instance, I'm talking about the American Evangelical Church. So it's like, this is I have to like, I have all these arguments that I'm making about that topic, and I have to keep them consistent as they move through the chapters. But it's also a memoir. So I have to line the topics up with my story, or line my story up with the topics, and make sure that also has logical order. And I didn't realize that, like, oh, I need inciting incidents for every quote unquote scene at every level. So I
Mm,
need a global inciting incident for my story, my personal story, and for the story of and for each theme story, I need an inciting incident to, like, I need, or in three-story method language, I need a conflict, and then like choices and consequences in at every chapter level, at every scene level, and and then at the global level as well. So it's just it's an inch. I hadn't thought about nonfiction this way, and so it's an interesting exercise in lining things up. And I was really frozen in like writing it until I figured out the structure, and then I was like, okay, now I kind of get how this. And it was interesting. Like I wrote 5 chapters, and I was just like, this is not. I was unhappy. I don't know if you ever get that feeling, but like, you don't know what's wrong, but you know something's wrong. You're not sure what it is, but something's going on.
see,
Um,
as a writer, as an editor, I don't ever have that
you,
problem. However, I do work with writers who have that problem.
yeah, yeah. And so I was finally able to put my finger on what the problem was. I was like, okay, here's the problem is I don't have I'm just telling random stories. There's no journey to this, and I have to make it into a journey. Which, going back to what Lepisky's doing in The Parrot in the Igloo, he has a very clear journey, and that's one of the reasons I think it's great, is because it's like, oh, this is a easy to follow and interesting journey, and you're informing me about a larger theme as you're telling me about these characters that kind of lived it out. So anyway, yeah, that's what I've learned about writing. Yeah, John Trudy's book, Anatomy of Genre, is really helpful. I didn't When I first read John Trudy's book, I was not a fan. I think I may have said it on this podcast to somebody. I feel like there's a really, really smart elder statesman, and this is how I felt about the book. There's a really, really smart elder statesman, and somebody sat across from him was like, okay, Western, go. And he just started talking about a genre. And they wrote it down. That's how the book reads. Now, other people have been like, Jeff, that's not how I read the book, but that was my experience with the book. I read it, I was like, this is just like really smart guy rambling things in no coherent order. He's just like, and then they like kind of tried to fasten some order to it. But I was reading it just to like try to get it as like, I was reading it like a textbook, and I realized that like, oh, now that I'm writing memoir, man, that chapter makes a lot more sense to me. It's like, oh, now that chapter actually, like, now I understand what Trudy's saying. He hit all of the problems I was having. I was like, oh yeah, this is that. So I just figured out like, oh, I need to use this book differently. This isn't a like comprehensive guide to teach me about genre. This is a like, hey, if you're struggling with this genre, go read this book. It's like having a conversation with Trudy about that genre. So anyway, it was yeah, that's another thing I learned.
Neat.
Don't diss John Trudy's book. That's the other thing I learned about writing. Um, Anything else you want to throw in that inspire any?
I think so.
Okay.
I really don't know what I've done recently. I know I've been busy a lot, but I don't know what I've done recently. And then I hear the list of all the things you've done, and I'm like, I don't think I actually do anything in my
Oh, comparing my odd productivity to others is not, that's not a healthy thing to compare. That's not a good, that's, yeah. Um, it's not like being like, man, like no one should say, I want to be as weirdly productive as I am. That's not a good, yeah, that's not a good thing to say. Okay, it's in a neuroses. It's not a it's not a
leave
strength.
that there, and we'll move to the next
We'll move to
question.
the next one.
The next question,
We're on question three,
question
four,
three.
and already Jeff has dipped into like, let's have therapy time. All right,
Yeah,
question
and
four.
that's why we're going back to the questions,
This
because nobody has time for that.
not even my therapist. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, as writers, we aim to have dialogue that seems realistic, but in fact is not, because writers delete the superfluous words, example, ums, and irrelevant waffle. In reality, internal dialogue is very fragmented. How do we structure internal dialogue that is engaging and not so choppy as it throws readers out of the page? Okay, so do you want to take this one first? I answered the other two first.
No, you can take this one first. I feel like the next one I'm gonna have to answer because it's my mess that I've created.
Oh,
So this one I think is good for you to answer.
okay. So, I love character voice.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about writing clean dialogue versus realistic, superfluous ums, irrelevant words, blah, blah, blah. Often we do that because as writers, we are taught as very young children that this is the way you write, and how you write is different than you talk. So a lot of people don't know how to edit their work in a way that those ums and irrelevant waffles and mistakes and missed words and cleaning up their words, how to write it on a page that creates a realistic voice as opposed to a distraction to their writers, excuse me, to their readers, as a writer, a distraction to their readers. There is a way to do it, but there's also a time and a place to do it, because the purpose of creating voice is to help your readers connect with your characters and understand who your character is. So while in real life your character might make those kinds of mistakes, if it doesn't benefit your story to include those kinds of mistakes, we do want to take them out. And we want to do the same thing in internal dialogue, because internal dialogue should only appear on the page when it is a modulation of the character's voice itself. We always use Linus from the House in the Cerulean Sea, or the House in, on, and whatever that word is between House and Cerulean Sea. Sorry, TJ Klune, for not knowing the name of your book. So
I
we
get to
talk about
interview
it.
him this week.
I know, I'm so excited for you. It's probably a good thing that I'm away without internet access, because I might accidentally, sort of on purpose,
Crash the interview.
crash your interview.
Hey, Laura's here too. Yeah, sorry. I totally distracted your answer.
That's okay. No, I
Yeah.
can go right back to it. So Linus's internal dialogue happens because it's in direct conflict with the voice that comes out of his mouth, because it's a different modulation of who he is. But then as the book continues and he has a character growth arc, by the time he gets to the end of the book, he doesn't have internal dialogue anymore, because his external dialogue matches his internal dialogue. So this is actually kind of a complex question, in that we can include the messiness of real language. We often just don't know how, so we edit it out. That's such a weird word. I can't even say it. We take it all out. Or we put it in, but it feels weird. So our readers are like, hey, you got to clean this up. Often because when we're thinking clearly and we know what's happening, we don't use those stutters and stumbles the way that we do when we're trying to figure things out. So it's often very difficult to mimic that kind of realism in language.
Nice. Good answer. Yeah. I
Not that I
don't
gave
think I
that
have
any
anything
thought
to
or
add.
anything.
No, you weren't prepared for that one at all.
No.
Yeah, I don't think that I have anything to add to that. I think that was a good answer.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. No, you covered it. I think yeah, nope, I got nothing to answer. Let's do the next one.
Okay, this one's for you.
This
You
one's
got
for
it?
me. I do have it. I'm going to summarize. It's a long question, so I'm going to summarize it from the beginning. Again, it comes from the Dialogue Doctor community. So, in the community, for those who are listening to this and aren't part of the community, just to give you background, in the community every Tuesday, I post a writing prompt. Most Tuesdays, not every, most Tuesdays, I post a writing prompt. And about 7 or 8 months ago, they started having themes. It used to just be like a random, like, here's a dialogue challenge. But then it was like, hey, we're a learning community. Part of learning is practicing. So let's take what we talk about in the community and actually like put it to practice. So, for example, the last big set was I would give you different voices, like different voices based on character personalities. You were supposed to have a static main character, and each week you worked on writing your main character in a scene with that type of voice. So it was like, let's practice voices. What we're doing right now is we're practicing character growth. And to do character growth, we're looking at casts and the vehicle, engine, anchored, hazard language that we use. This question actually doesn't have anything else to do with VIA, though, except that it mentions vehicles in the question. So vehicle is the character that you want your reader to travel emotionally with in the story. So often it's your point of view character, or if your point of view character is like today, for example, in the how a good tiger fighter is hard to find, the point of view character was definitely more of a narrator, and he didn't have his own emotional journey. The journey they wanted you to follow, like the vehicle character, are the director and the actor, the head star. which is interesting because you actually really want to follow the tiger. So it's a it's a again, that literary stuff. I'm not going to go into that. But so the vehicle character is like who the story, the characters or character that you want the story to, the reader to follow in the story. Vehicle characters often have a character growth arc. They should have a character growth arc. Because that's the journey the reader is going on. So the first prompt of the set was like, hey, I gave everybody like 15 questions. I was like, let's start planning out our characters. And then the second prompt was, show me specifically, I wanted to know what your vehicle character's flaw was. And with the idea that like, hey, the stories we're going to write here, we're going to practice character growth. So we're going to write a series of stories that we can show a character growing and changing through. So we need to know how they're changing. So then the second one was like, write a story in which you show your character's flaw. So the question is, my general question, what's the method being used to highlight the perspective of the vehicle character and what's the expected result? So hopefully that question makes sense to everybody now that I've like explained for 15 minutes what we're doing. So is it a failed exercise if I have to explain it for 15 minutes? I don't know. That's something I should think about. Insiders understand it. So
we really are pushing pretty hard the
oh
community.
man, I didn't plan that today, but that is happening. It's like this is a community podcast today. Come join the community. So
But really do, because it's fun.
it is fun. So I think sorry, I'm trying to decide what direction to approach this question from. What we need to understand about character flaw is that when we're talking about writing and character voice, the flaw is part of the personality. Now, in personality theory, when we talk about personality in like, real life, not in fiction, a personality is a set of markers that are shared across a population of people that allow us to distinguish those people one from another. So there's like, sociologically wise, there's like the ocean one, which is like your openness to the world, your conscientiousness, your extroversion, I don't remember the A. Or the N for that matter. But so there's, there's like the Enneagram, which like lines up like, oh, here's your deepest, darkest fear, and it allows you to compare and contrast. Or there's like, you could use Strengths Finder to determine personality, which is like, here's your different strengths. So there's all these different ways, Myers-Briggs, but it's just a system to compare and contrast different types of people with each other.
Write these questions just so you can talk about these different
I
personalities.
didn't write this question. This was
You
not my question.
or you've brainwashed the community, because I feel like every Q&A we have, like I'm gonna start playing a drinking game. If someone is a big enough fan to go back through all of
Oh
our
man.
Q&A podcasts and count the number of times you talk about the personality test,
Personality test.
specifically the Enneagram, which I think is your favorite.
It is my favorite. I think the problem is, um, I talk about this all the time, but not well. So it leaves a lot of questions.
I don't I think
People
you
are like, wait, what did you say?
no,
Um,
I think you do it really well, and I think people love hearing about it, which I think is why you love to talk about it.
well, it's
So,
helpful. So
sorry, I distracted you.
no, it's good. Whatever personality system you're using when you're writing fiction, you need to make sure that personality system includes a flaw that needs to be fixed. And again, like in real life personality, that flaw that needs to be fixed is typically left out of the system. Like you're not going to find that in Strengths Finder. The reason we include it is because,
Focuses on strengths.
and it usually focuses on things that are more permanent.
Mhm.
Like flaws that need to be fixed are things that you can do something about. And so typically we leave that out of personality. For fiction, though, we're talking about like your personality, your character voice is the manifestation on the page of your character's personality. So because that is the case, you have to include the flaw you're fixing in your character's personality, or the flaw you're fixing will not be communicated in your character's voice. So that's why the first time we wrote a vehicle character in this exercise, I was like, demonstrate the character's flaw through their voice, because the flaw is part of, in fiction writing, that personality. So if your character is a people pleaser and they need to learn that they don't have to please everybody, we need to see people pleasing in their character voice. If your character is a like lone wolf, I don't give a crap about other people, then, and that's the flaw that needs to be fixed. They need to learn how to be like part of a team. We need to see that in their character voice. We need to see in the opening of the book. Now, this is part of the character voice that's going to change over time. Um,
And
yeah,
I
so
think,
that, oh, go
oh,
ahead. I'm sorry.
sorry, I was going to say, I think it's important to understand the distinction of what we mean when we say we need to see it in the character voice. Because I think a lot of writers, because they know their characters so well, they think what they're writing is communicating to the reader something that the reader isn't necessarily picking up. That's what we call in editing reader burden, right? Like
Yeah.
you as the writer know something that isn't being accurately communicated. So in the example that you gave about the people pleaser being part of the voice, we tend as writers to put people pleasers actions to demonstrate their flaw. Somebody gets asked to do something, and even though the vehicle character knows that it's against their best interest, they do it. But there's nothing in the conversation about it, right? Like a people pleaser doesn't necessarily have to acquiesce to every request. It's about their ultimate decision. But to show the discomfort, there can be a conversation about, I don't really think so. Maybe we could do this. Maybe there's a different, but then in the end, the action is acquiescing. And that I think that's where the distinction comes in between voice and action. The writers are doing a great job putting the action of acquiescing. I love that word, by the way,
Yeah, I
just
was about to
in case
say, good
anybody's
word.
curious. I it from the original Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request, right? Like
Good quote.
ever since then, like it's like I just love the word.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the reason that it becomes important to come out of the character's mouth is because when you don't communicate the discomfort, then you just have a character who is walking around who just does everything everybody asks. They aren't a people pleaser, they're just the person who does everything that's asked of them, and there's a distinction in personality there.
Yeah, and I think the danger we walk into when we don't include our character's flaw that's going to demand growth in the plot in the character voice is we end up creating a character voice separate and then think of the character growth as like the theme of the story. So we'll be like,
Mhm.
okay, I want my character to be a people pleaser who's going to who needs to like learn to take care of themselves or other people. Their personality is they're very shy and they don't engage with people. And it's like, okay, you just, sure, that is possible. But by saying you have a shy people pleaser, you just made your job a gazillion times harder,
Mhm.
because shy people don't want to engage with people. So the idea that they have this deep desire to please people is going to be very difficult to communicate on the page. So like part of this is a lot is making your job easier. Like, let's align all these things so that your job is easier as a writer. So, like, a
Mhm.
bubbly character is way easier to couple with people pleasing because the bubbly character is around other people all the time. So it's easier to like, does that make sense? Like, it's not that you can't have a shy character. This people pleaser, it's just hard. And so, as you're like, that's why I say, like, hey, let's take it all into one picture before we move to the character voice, because putting it all on that one picture helps you
Mhm.
realize the journey you're setting yourself up for. And
Yeah.
you can be strategic about it. Like, is that really the book you want to write? Because you say that, and then you write a couple scenes with the shy character, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I realize to get my character changing, I have to put them in these circumstances where they're around people all the time. And
Hmm.
now you're dealing with two things: the fact that your character doesn't want to be around people, and that they're a people pleaser. They've got this, like,
Right.
you know, conflict driving in their very nature. That's a fine book, but again, you're just making it hard for yourself. So,
Right.
like, yeah,
Right. I also think that we have a tendency to take a snapshot of a personality and make a lot of assumptions about it. For example, I think a lot of people assume that people pleasers are pleasing people because they're shy and they don't know how to find their voice and they don't know how to say it. Where that's not always the reason that people pleasers are people pleasers, right? Like, so I think it's about really understanding and this is where I do think that the Enneagram and some of these other personality things can be really helpful for people who haven't studied human behavior as much as maybe you and I have as part of our day job, right? Like, if you don't really know kind of what makes people who they are, it's really easy to get a picture of somebody in your head and take the most recent example of what that is, or take what seems to be easy, this person's a people pleaser because they're shy, and create a character around that instead of using the opportunity to create kind of that uniqueness in the character of somebody who's really bubbly but also a people pleaser.
yeah, yeah. I I'm just gonna say, if you want to know more about this, this is what the masterclass is on in 2 weeks. We're talking about writing to character growth, and
Nice.
I'm gonna spend a good, like, 45 minutes talking about what components you need to be looking for when you're designing a character personality. Like, that's a part, that's the opening part of the masterclass. And again, part of the reason I'm doing that is I think that we become too reductive. Um, we become um, reductive, but not strategic. Being strategically reductive is great.
Right.
Reductive, but not strategic is actually just getting you in trouble. So we're
Right.
going to talk about, like, hey, this is, if you're writing for character growth, which everybody should be, this
Hmm.
is what you're looking to, this is what you got to know about your character. And this
Everybody
is,
who's writing mass market fiction should be. If you want to be the next Hemingway, your characters do not have to grow at all ever.
but
I know, I'm
you gotta
kidding. I'm
know
kidding.
that they're not. Like, that's
I'm
the thing. Yeah. You gotta know that they're not, right? Like,
kidding.
and Hemingway's stuff, like The Sun Also Rises, there is constant opportunity for growth that is just kind of drowned in whiskey. So anyway, there's yeah, you got to know that they're not. And that's the thing, is that understanding kind of like how a character growth arc is made and formed, and then how you write through it, what the
Mhm.
scenes are, and then again, how to build cast. And that's where this question really comes from, is because, to kind of wrap the question, part of what was confusing was, I was like giving an example of, like, if this is how you want your character to grow, show us their perspective, show us their flaw. And I said, so if you have a people pleaser, put someone in the scene that they have to please, to show me that they're flawed in a way that, like, I don't want to please this person, but I have to. But I didn't explain it well, so it generated a question. Anyway, I hope that answers the question a little bit. Find the flaw has to be part of the personality. It has to be illustrated in the character voice. And early in the book, we want scenes in which you demonstrate, this is what is wrong with this character, and this is how this character is going to grow. Um, Ideally in the world before the inciting incident. Uh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
even if it didn't answer the question, it was a really fun discussion.
that's right. Even if I beat the wrong dead horse, I beat a dead horse. Okay. What are the three best resources for new writers, would you
I mean,
say?
obviously, the Dialogue Doctor book, the Dialogue
What?
Doctor podcast, and the Dialogue Doctor master classes.
What, this book right here? The Dialogue Doctor Will See You Now? That book right there?
Oh, look at
I know. I just happen to have a copy right here. Yeah.
that.
Those are the three.
Those
And
are
you're
the
done.
yeah. Incidentally, they are also the same for experienced writers.
That's right. Um, that's no more questions. Um,
Mm.
let's go back and forth. So you said the dialogue doctor stuff, which I appreciate. I probably wouldn't have said it. Uh, I will
Well, I know
throw
you
out.
wouldn't. That's why I can say it.
I will throw out. I think for beginning writers, there's an aspect of the story grid book that's really important. For beginning writers, the story grid book is a lot. So
Hmm.
I recommend with beginning writers, I'm like, hey, Google story grid scene construction and get the like, this is the important components of a story. I have them listed up here on my board. I'm trying to remember what they call them. But yeah, there's that's what you want from story grid when you're starting. Inciting incident, turning point, crisis, climax, resolution, the 5 commandments of a story from story grid.
Hmm.
They have articles on their website about it. I would start there as a new writer. Um, it's a good, the 5 commandments of a story with story grid. It's a great way to like start to understand a scene. Do you have another one or can I give another one?
Go for it.
Um, I also think understanding the hero's journey. I know that there's a lot of different journeys. There's a heroine's journey. There's all these different
Mhm.
journeys. The hero's journey is the one most prevalent in our popular culture right now. So you got to, I would say, and again, you don't need to buy a book for this. You don't need to like go read 1,000 works. You can Google it and read. When I started writing, I was like, Google was my best. Google and Wikipedia were my best friends. And if I was listening to a writer podcast and somebody said something I didn't know, I immediately, as soon as I got to a computer, would Google it. And I would be like, what is that? I actually would write down vocabulary in my journal. People would be like, the hero's journey. I'd be like, what is that? And I go Google it and read it. Be like, the 3 act play structure. I'd be like, what is that? And I go Google it and read it. And like,
Mhm.
Wikipedia is, we live in an amazing information age. So I think using Wikipedia to understand basic premises of stuff. Now, my Googling Hero's Journey and reading Hero's Journey was nowhere near the understanding I have of it now that I've been writing for 10 years. But that initial understanding was all I
Mhm.
actually needed. It was great. I didn't need the depth of it. I just needed to know, like, oh, this is kind of how a story's put together. That's why, like with Story Grid is amazing for an experienced writer. I think you should absolutely read Story Grid. For a beginning writer, you really just need the 5 commandments.
It's
Yeah.
really funny. So I think Vonnegan's Shapes of Stories
Oh, such a great.
is, and what I appreciate about it is you don't have to study it
No.
to understand. Like once you get the concept
Yeah.
of there are these like basic trajectories,
Mhm.
and your characters can just follow those trajectories.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the one that I have a tendency to lean toward. Um,
Yeah. And I love it because it forces you as a beginning writer, it poses the question to you, how does the reader feel?
mhm,
Which is a question we don't naturally ask. It's an important question. How does the reader feel in this
mhm,
story? Yeah.
yeah.
I'm trying to think if I have another one for beginning writers that they should use. Um, other writers, when you're starting,
Mhm,
putting yourself in connection with other writers is really important. Whether that's, if you're just listening to podcasts, like when I started writing, Jay Thorne and Rachel Herron were doing the Writers Well. And I used to devour every episode of the Writers Well. Or Joanna Penn's The Creative Pen was another one. But writers talking about writing, I think is important for new writers, not just to get the lingo, but to start to understand like, oh, here's the journey of a book. And specifically, I would look for podcasts that are about craft. So many podcasts are about marketing. That's not bad. That's a really important thing, and we really need to know about it. I listen to a ton of marketing podcasts, but I don't know that that's helpful for a new writer. Uh, I think for a new writer, you need to listen to writers talking about writing. And that's what I used to love about Jay Thorne and Rachel Herron's conversations where they were about writing. You can still find them. They're online. Writers Well is what that was called. But it was a good find writers talking about writing, whether you're in a Slack group with writers talking about writing or Discord with writers talking about writing, or whether you're listening to a podcast. But that's an important thing to be doing is getting into the like, here's a struggle this writer's having with finishing their story. I have that same struggle. Here's how they're solving it. Maybe I can solve it in that way too. Yeah. Do you have another one?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. I was trying to think if I have any like editing resources for new writers, but a lot of my editing skills I didn't learn. I learned at our day job and I
Mhm.
translated them into fiction writing as opposed to, hey, I went out to learn and hone the skill in the writing world.
Yeah.
But I will put it on my goals list for the rest of the year to find some good editing resources for the community.
Yeah. Save the Cat was really important for me early on, but I'm a plotter. Like I need a plot. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that's if you're a pantser, I don't know that Save the Cat's going to help you. So, but if you're a plotter like me, that was really important. And plotter is somebody who needs to plan out the work before they write it. A pantser wants the white page and wants to like just dive in. I really needed the structure, so that was very helpful for me. Um, okay, what would you say for experienced writers?
The dialogue doctor?
The dialogue,
No. Um,
we cover the
so
whole gamut.
no, I would say that um finding a beta reading community that you can trust and rely on as an experienced writer becomes a really important resource. Part of that is knowing the questions that you need to ask of your community. But you also want to make sure that your community has representation of the characters who are on the screen and can look at the story from an understanding of, hey, this is the story I want to put into the world. You are representative of the community who is going to read it. So I think just making sure that the people who are going to read it are going to be able to give you feedback for that and not for, hey, this is the kind of book that I like to read. So I want you to make your story or your book what I want, as opposed to really kind of understanding the characters' experiences. I think that's important.
Yeah. Um, what else would I add to that? That's great advice. Um, I
Role
got into play structure and screenplay structure when I got more experienced. That was really important for me.
hmm
Understanding like the different act structures of plays really helped me kind of push away my plotting, understanding how screenwriters approach their work was important, especially the efficiency of it. That was really important for me. Again, that was me Googling and reading every article I could find on it. I found another thing I did as an experienced writer that I would recommend is I would pick authors I respected. I still do this, and I would like I'm doing it. I just mentioned I'm reading a whole Langston Hughes poetry, and I would obsess over single authors. So I would read their history. I would read that like what do critics and scholars who study them say about like this is how they write, this is what they do, this is what, and then I'd read books that they'd written and trying to understand. I thought of it and still think of it a lot as like artists do, where like I'm gonna try to draw like this person for a while until I actually learn how to do it. And then I'm going to go pick a different style and try to learn to draw like that person for a while. Um, I found it very helpful as an experienced writer to really push what I did, to learn like, okay, these are the things that this writer does in their work. Um, like reading Stephen King was great. Reading Stephen King with an eye to this is what he's one of the ones I did early on. Reading Stephen King with an eye like this is what Stephen King does in his when he's writing was more important as an experienced writer, to start mimicking the styles of people that I liked. But to mimic their styles, you actually have to like invest in understanding who they are. And it doesn't, you don't have to like, you don't need a master's degree in them. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, take 45 minutes one night, an hour one night, and Google that writer and read their Wikipedia page. And there'll be articles at the bottom of the Wikipedia page that's like, they'll say something like Stephen King has uh villains that are larger than life in their derangement, like demonic level derangement. And so it's one of like his kind of tropes. It's like, oh, or one of not tropes, but one of his like, unique features to his writing. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And then you can just scroll down to the bottom of Wikipedia and it'll be like, here's the scholarly article that came from. And then you just go read it. And like and usually that article, like, and that's in comparison to these people, or that's in comparison to these people, or this is when that started. And it's like, oh, I see now. You can start to see what makes the writers you love great. And it gives you options to mimic what's going on. Right. A lot of times you'll find weaknesses in the writers you love too. You can be like, well, I want to keep this strength, but I also want to look at this weakness. Like I remember when I learned that George R. R. Martin used to write soap operas, because he was another one that I like obsessed over for a little bit.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, that explains so much. Then reading
Why
how
everybody
he
does.
did that and like what that meant and what soap opera writing is and like why that's important to understand, why when people write about him they say that, why does that matter? Um, you know, I think when you get to that, when you get to a deeper level of experience, and it's not a continuum. It's not like everybody, this is the moment. I think it's more just like I feel experienced now. I'm gonna go dig a little bit deeper, but I think digging deeper into masters that you appreciate is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that answer.
Do you have another one for experienced writers?
No. I'll move on.
Anything by Robert McKee? That's an experienced writer read. That's not something I would recommend to a beginner because his books are big, but that's an experienced writer. Beginning writers, we should say On Writing by Stephen King was really great. That's a really great beginner writer. It's more memoir than it is about writing, but there's a lot of like solid writing advice in there. I will say he doesn't follow the advice that he puts in the book. They're more his like desires.
He doesn't have to.
He does. I mean, he does a lot, but he says things in the book like never use an ly word. I have like three of his books. I promise I could pull Insiders off the shelf right there and find like five ly words in a matter of 5 minutes. But it's
Yeah,
yeah.
but when you get to Stephen King's level, people buy your book because it's got your name on it.
And you get to do what you want. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Are we ready for the last question?
Ready for the last question?
You want to read this one?
No, because I flipped the page.
Okay.
I'd have to go look for it.
What is a process of writing that as a new writer you found insurmountable, but now that you have experience, you find easier to manage?
This is a good question. Yeah, I like this question.
Yeah, I can answer first. Because my development as a writer is very clear in my mind.
Mm,
Um, I never really struggled with character voice. That's one of the things I do naturally. I struggled with plotting was a big problem for me up front, and specifically understanding conflict. I could write scenes where people talk about nothing all day. So I had to learn like there has to be conflict here. Um, Laura's like, yes, I read your early work. I know you have a lot of scenes where people talk about nothing.
I was not going to say that. I'm going to say that as an editor who only reads mass market fiction, you know what? You might have been the next Hemingway if you hadn't let me beta read and edit your first
If I
book.
had to take your advice on I might have been the next Hemingway. It's pretty
You could
funny.
have been. I'm sorry, I ruined it for you
That's all right.
because I took
Um,
your lit fiction and I made it mass market.
you make it best market. Yeah, so but that was my first stage, was like, oh, I need to understand plot. And once I got it, I got it. Like I don't
Mhm.
struggle with it anymore. My next phase was point of view. I struggled. I naturally wrote in third person point of view, and I did not comprehend why or how someone would write in first person or second person point of view. It's like
Mhm.
I don't. So I read a bunch of second person POV books, and I read a bunch of first person POV books, and I asked people. I was like, "Why do you do that?" And I was like trying to figure out, like, what is it that this point of view does? And then I learned that what I thought was a universal third person point of view is actually called third person close, and there's like different third person point of views, and then there's so point of view is a big one that I had to understand. And then I think my third phase was understanding the need why exposition is important. That was a big one for me because I was like, they're talking, they're fine. I had to take a step back and be like, what is this? Why do we have these paragraphs here? Um, and then I think I moved from understanding exposition to understanding inner thought. And that's like within the last 2 years. I've really struggled to understand why you would have inner thought in a book and what it does and how it works in third person POV, which is still my preferred writing formula. So yeah, it's just that was my progression. It was from plot to um into POV into inner thought would be how I'd like progress through my things that felt insurmountable, and then I figured out. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So again, not being a writer, but being an editor, um, there, the first thing was just like knowing how to craft a good story.
Mm,
I had this like idea that writers could write good stories and they could make stuff up, and bad writers just weren't good at it. This idea that there's a craft to it, it's an
mm,
art, it's a skill that can be developed and honed, was like so foreign to me. I thought it was like athletics, right? Like
mm,
there are people who are naturally athletic who can hone their skill, and then there are people who really are just not athletic at all, right? And that's kind of how I thought there was, yeah, and then you can have some amateurs, right?
mm,
But I really thought it was kind of like you just have this skill and you hone your skill or you don't. Um, so really kind of understanding that there are things that make a story good
yeah.
and that I could learn those components and then I could like apply them when I was reading someone else's story.
Mm,
So
yeah.
this idea that like, you got from here to here, but this jump doesn't make sense to me. Understanding why it doesn't make sense. It's not
Yeah.
just, you probably remember in the early edits, I was like, I don't know why this is wrong, but you've created a burden for me, and you as the writer have to go and fix it. Good luck to you, right? Like,
Your notes were not that explanatory. They were like red X's, no.
green, always
Green
green.
X's, sorry,
Or
green
pencil,
X's,
pencil. I edited
green
in pencil.
X's, no. Like,
No, I
no.
mean, but some of it just needed a no.
It did.
No.
Yeah. I still remember it. It was my second book. And I wrote a scene of just two people talking. And you crossed out like 2 pages and you wrote no. And then you wrote, you know why. And then
And you do know why.
And then like 3 pages later, you did it again. and you wrote, "I said stop it." And what I loved about the note was I was like, I've already written this. I can't. It's like I can't respond in
So
real time to what we've printed these pages off. I
yeah, my
can't.
question is, do you still have the first handwritten edits that I gave you? Are they in a file
They're in a
drawer
folder
somewhere?
upstairs. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
have them accessible to myself right
Yeah.
now, but yeah, they're
No,
around.
I'm gonna need to see them at some point because some of this I think you're making up.
I'm not.
I know.
I can tell you the scene. If
No,
I
I
told you the scene, you probably know the
no,
scene.
I know. I
Guess the scene.
also the wait, the one about the former CIA agent. I know I told you why you couldn't have that one. I didn't just say you know why.
No, that's not it.
No.
That's not the
Um,
scene that you crossed out like 2 pages.
no, I do remember, however, reading a line where you were describing somebody watching somebody else on the street, like a gazelle watching a lion in the, I don't
Flip
know.
it. There's a lion
I
watching a gazelle.
whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, no,
No,
don't do
yeah,
this.
no. It
This
was the scene I'm thinking of. I had 3 characters sitting around a table, and 2 of them were making fun of the other character's name.
oh yes. Yes.
And you were like, and it goes on, it went on for 2 pages. And you were like, no.
Yeah, no, that was not your first book though.
No, I was saying my second book. This was in my second book.
I thought that was in the Stacy and Mo book.
No, that was in the 12 Commandments.
I didn't read the 12 Commandments.
You did. You left me notes on it. It was my second book.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I guess I don't remember the edits I do any
yeah,
more than I read the book for
yeah.
the book to
It was
read.
a long time ago. It was like 10 years ago.
No, I
Yeah.
remember reading Mencken. I
Yeah, you
don't
read
remember
Mencken.
reading 10 Commandments. Wait, is 10 Commandments the one with Chris and
Jose. Yeah.
Jose?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was
They're in Mencken too, but they only show toward the end of Mencken.
yeah, no, for some reason, okay, I did read 12 Commandments then.
Yeah.
Which one didn't I read? There was another one that I did not read.
You didn't read The Lost Boys.
No, I read The Lost Boys because that's the one that has the bad guy in the tower and he raises the Lost Boy children.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I read that one.
You didn't read Saving Deborah,
Nope, I read Saving Deborah.
where they go to New York.
Yep, I read Saving
Oh.
Deborah. No, there was one, I thought there was one
No, I don't
between,
think you've read Fight or Steel.
no, I haven't read Fight or Steel. But
Yeah.
no, there was another one in the Mencken series though, wasn't there?
No, there's 4. There's Mencken, 12 Commandments. Corey wrote one. You haven't read Corey's.
No, I haven't read
Yeah.
Corpse.
But yeah, Minor Mencken, 12 Commandments, Lost Boys, Saving Deborah. Those are the 4 in the Mencken series.
Hmm.
This is like we've totally veered off of like what
That's
is
okay.
interesting
This
to
is
people.
important though. We should know
This
your books.
is not important. No one should know my books. Yeah, you didn't read. I did write some in between those books that you didn't read.
Huh.
Like I wrote Mark and all the magical things in between those books. I don't think you
I
read.
did not edit it. I read part of it, but I read your
You read
short
the
story.
first, and you're like, I'm done with that. Um,
True.
and then I wrote Seven Nights in a Bar in there too, which I don't think you read.
No, I did not read Seven Nights in a
Yeah,
Bar.
yeah, no one
No.
should.
I thought there was another one that you had written that I didn't read, but no, I read the I think the reason I didn't think I read 12 Commandments was because I thought the name of that one feels weird to me since it was Jose's story.
Yeah, well, he's learning the 12 Commandments through the book,
Got it.
but they're dispersed. They're really dispersed through the book. They're not easy to
Got
find.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he learns like 6 of them in the last chapter.
Nice.
I didn't understand plot.
Oh, and I did read Fight. I did not read Steel.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Read
read Grab
Fight,
and
not
Fight,
Steal.
but I
Okay.
didn't read Steel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So go read Jeff's books.
Don't read my books. Go
I
read the
read Into
Dialogue
an
Doctor book.
Upside like 3
That's the book
times.
you should read.
Which one?
The Dialogue Doctor book. That's the book you should
Yes,
read.
go
That's the
read
book
that
that people
book.
are showing up for, not my weird struggles with market fiction where I'm like, I know what kind of book I'm writing. And then halfway through, I'm like, and now there's homeless people in it. And people are reading, and they're like, wait, this isn't what we.
I feel like there are homeless people in all your books.
I do. I have Popeye and
Sexy Tony
Sexy
in
Tony
every
in every
book.
book. Yeah, my two reoccurring homeless guys. They're my Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They show up in every book and make comments in the background about what's going
Nice.
on.
You do love to have those threads.
I
You
haven't put them in
should order
nerds
me
yet. I haven't put Popeye and Sexy Tony in nerds, mostly because
a
nerds has
paid
been taking
JP.
place in the Midwest, and I couldn't figure out how to get Popeye and Sexy Tony from Baltimore to the Midwest. But part of Nerd season 2 is taking place in DC, so I will be sneaking Popeye and Sexy
Nope.
Tony
I
into
paid
nerds.
JP to cut it out.
Hopefully he doesn't listen to this. He doesn't get onto my schemes
Yeah.
of yeah.
No. I don't think they're as likable of characters as you think they are. Yeah.
What are you talking about? Sexy Tony, who turns everything into a sexual innuendo, is in an aggressive way, is super
Yeah.
likable.
Was really funny in the 80s. It's like,
Laura, a
okay,
joke is
so
funnier if you keep telling them.
okay, so you know how they remade Quantum Leap?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so Jason and I were watching Quantum Leap, so I was like, oh, this is so nostalgic. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna watch the original. Don't go back and watch the original.
No, it's not.
No,
No,
no.
no.
Sexy Tony is Al from the original.
Oh, I don't know that I ever made that comparison. I don't think of him that way.
Yeah,
That's
that
funny.
the aggressively sexual innuendos about everything,
Yeah.
the misogyny. Yeah,
Yes.
no,
He's such a misogynist.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
not really an endearing
And then
character, Jeff.
Popeye is Mike from Breaking Bad. Those are my two.
Yeah, again, I think you and I have very different.
Those are my two.
At least Mike had redeemable qualities, like he
If
loved
anybody
his
wonders
granddaughter.
why I've struggled to sell, this is my deep need to entertain myself
Yes,
over what the
yes.
readers.
Well, I do remember having lunch with you when you were writing Mencken, and I was like, "Do you know that your main character is not likable and
I
he's
was like, yeah.
terrible at his job?"
I was like, yeah, that's the point. He's terrible at his job. And you're like, this is what are you doing? I was like, he's a terrible reporter. That's part of what's funny. And you're like, it's no one gets the joke. I was like, I get it.
People buy it; they get the joke.
Yeah.
No,
Did
but and so the thing about Mencken is he becomes redeemable
he
through the
does.
story.
He does. He has a big change at the end of the first book.
Yeah,
And
and
then
he's surrounded by likable characters.
yeah, and then by the
Which
third book, he's actually pretty good. By the time you get to the Lost Boys, Mencken is
I forgot
pretty
Mencken
good.
was even in the Lost Boys.
Yeah, he's the main character. He's the one that like
I
hunts them
mean,
all down and finds them. He gets
you,
shot at the end of the Lost Boys.
you say that, but oh, maybe you should say spoiler before you tell the ending of them.
Whatever. These books are 10 years old. I can't even believe we're talking about them on the podcast.
Yes, they're fantastic.
Yeah, he
But
gets shot at the end of the he goes they're chasing down the Lost Boys murders. And
yes,
the in one of the ending scenes of the Lost Boys is he has to because part of Mencken's problem, part of his major character flaw is that he's super arrogant.
yes,
But then he doesn't want to sacrifice anything
yes.
ever.
He's also very bad at his job.
Yeah, he's a
He
bad
has an
reporter.
unearned arrogance
He
to him,
does, which is what I loved about him. But so
which is
he's
what other people did not.
the dot. Yeah, he's got an unearned arrogance and he's bad at he's not a great reporter, but he thinks he's amazing. He's a blogger who thinks he's an amazing reporter. And so he and it is interesting. It's part of that whole like I was figuring out point of view and learning point of view because the stories are told from Mencken's point of view.
Hmm.
And so I found a lot of readers weren't in on the joke because the point of view is Mencken saying he's a great reporter. And so everybody's like, he's a great reporter. I'm like, he's a terrible reporter. But so anyway, he comes upon a like gang fight and he has to he finally at the end has to self-sacrifice to go and catch the criminals. It's the first time he actually like jumps into the action.
Yeah.
He jumps into the action at the end of book 1, but it's to fight invisible monsters. This is to fight like real life chaos. So yeah, so in the end of book 3, he jumps into the fight. Anyway, this, how do we get off on my weird books?
Because
I
we
will
talked
make
about
it
my
valuable
journey as a
as
editor
an editor.
and what
Yeah.
I didn't think that what felt insurmountable. But now
Fixing Joe's character.
it was about, all right, I'm just gonna stop because you're just
No, it's good. I love it. I think it's great. It's a good point. It's about leaving notes and like,
it actually wasn't. That wasn't why I started talking about it. It was about
sorry.
knowing how to advise a fix that is actually going to fix the story and
Oh
not
yeah.
just be a like, hey, right? Like, hey, there's first in the early years, I was like, there's a problem here. I don't know how to fix it. I probably don't even know the problem, but there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
But then I was able to see clearly what the problems were, but I didn't always have a strategy to fix it.
Yeah.
So, and then there was okay, I have a strategy to fix it, but am I fixing it for me or am I fixing it for the writer? Right? Like
Yeah.
understanding that difference between what I want as a reader and what an editor should be sharing.
Yeah.
So that, but those are all things that, I mean, there's lots that I'm still learning and growing with, but those were the things that felt in the beginning that couldn't be done.
Yeah. And this is a little off topic, but we are talking about it. So I'm gonna bring it in here. There's choices, like, because we talked about studying writers that you really admire, and part of what you're studying are the choices those writers make for their work. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was a moment when I was writing Making the Monsters where I was like, this is making this book less marketable. This thing I'm doing with these characters, that I keep bringing these two characters back, is making this book less marketable. And I was like, but this is who I am. This is like
Mm-hmm.
part of who I am as a writer, right? Like, and I have never written a book with a protagonist that isn't deeply, deeply flawed and in some ways unlikable. That's just part of my writing. Like, that's just that's who I gravitate. Like
Mm-hmm.
the last book, Inside Outside, Tim is so anxious. He's hard to read at times. He's so anxious.
But he's not unlikable.
He's not unlikable.
I think there's a difference between
Yeah.
flawed and unlikable.
Yeah. And I have learned like they don't have to be unlikable. They can just, like, Mo isn't unlikable, but
Right.
Mo is very flawed.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
And yeah.
honestly, I think in a lot of ways, we want to read stories about people who are likable and flawed because many of us see ourselves in that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think especially a lot of popular genres want to read the Reacher. They want to read the, like, this guy is walking onto the scene fully formed.
Yeah. But
And
I
I
would
don't,
I
when
would
my character
argue
started, yeah, that's one of the
I
reasons
would
I can't
argue
finish the
that Reacher
series.
is also deeply flawed.
He is, but I don't know that the people that read him see him that way.
Hi.
Um,
Do you
hey
want to tell us
dog.
what you like to read?
Laura's dog just joined us on the podcast.
Hi.
Yeah, I think though I think I actually struggle to write characters once they start to mature. I
Mm,
don't like them anymore. I don't like writing them anymore. And I recognize that this is a problem. So one of the reasons I can't finish the series. Mo started to mature, and I was like, I don't want to write Mo and
not
Stacy
fun
anymore.
anymore.
It's not fun anymore. I've stopped annoying the reader. So,
Again, so I think that the problem is that you are a Hemingway that I've tried to turn into a
into a Stephen
king
King. It's really funny.
with my editing.
Oh, I
Uh,
don't know. I don't have the pedigree or the ability with words that he did. But yeah, it's I think I just write weird books. But it's yeah, like Mark and All the Magical Things. That is a weird book. That's a weird book. If you want to read a weird book, man, that's a weird book. Anyway,
The full life teddy bear that follows him around.
that's only in the last chapter. He runs into a teddy bear and he chases it all over town. Um, in the first chapter, he has visions in his bathroom as he watches a bathroom tile
I
of his
remember.
past. Yeah.
So apparently I read the first chapter and the last
In the
chapter, but
last
the
chapter.
ones in between.
In the middle chapter, he gets candy hearts that give him messages on the subway.
I read that one
He has a
too.
box. Maybe you did read it. He has a box of candy hearts, and every time he pulls a heart out of the box, it has a different message for him.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think there's a difference between when I've read your books and when I've edited your books.
yeah, you didn't edit that one. Nobody edited that one, and you can tell. There's there's a chapter where he's out to dinner with the girl that's like supposed to be his love interest, but his waiter is 7.
I I do like that you say it's
See,
supposed to
it's
be
fun
fun,
for
but it's your
me.
book. I
It's
mean,
fun for me.
and again, I think this is why you should be writing lit fic.
I don't know.
And
Yeah.
I should stop editing because all right, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I
Oh,
have a new plan for us.
okay. A new plan.
This is gonna be our
This
2020.
podcast is so off the rails. We're so off the rails. Everybody stopped listening like 20 minutes ago. Okay, new plan,
Okay, so the next book that you write after you finish your memoir
which
is
I've started writing. I've got
right.
it plotted. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought you wrote like 4 chapters this week or last week or something.
No, that's the memoir.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
No, I've started plotting the next book that I write after the memoir.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm
eh,
excited about it. I was sharing because I'm excited. Yeah, go
okay,
ahead.
what is it about?
I'm going back to the Miracle Makers idea that there is a group of ex-cons that live in a house and they're part of this organization in cities and they get fax messages every morning that tell them to go to certain places and do things and they don't, and those
Like,
things end up causing miracles in people's lives, but they don't know where the faxes come from. They don't know. And I tried this book, I tried writing it, and I got like 25,000 words in, and it was really boring. And I realized the reason it was really boring is because I was making the actions like long term. It was like go and follow this woman for 4 days and solve this problem. And I was writing the memoir, thinking about something else, and thinking about the next book I'm going to write. Which is such a weird thing. But so I was like, I just clicked for me. It was like, oh, no, I'm doing these long term miracles. They have to be like go stand on this corner at 4:43 and push the guy to the left 2 centimeters, and
oh,
like that's it, that's all you get. And then so
yeah.
they have to like go figure it out and do it. And all of the what keeps the book moving is all of the actions the lead character does take less than like a minute, but timing's super important, and none of
Okay.
them make any sense. So that's the yeah.
So it's kind of like Travelers meets Person of Interest.
Yes. Yeah. It's
Nice.
like Travelers means
Nice.
Person of Interest. And the protagonist is a her name's Charlie. She is an unreliable narrator because she will not let you know her past. All you know about her is that she was serving a life sentence in prison and has now been released. And that's all the backstory you get. And her name's not actually Charlie. So, but she's in this new life. Yeah, and it gets weird. Elves bring her clothes at night because she doesn't own anything.
I think you really enjoy mixing your genres.
I love mixing genres.
I
It's
can
the
tell.
best.
Okay, so can I tell you my plan?
Yeah. I'm
Now that
sorry.
you've told me your book, because your that book is not going to work for my plan.
Okay, what's your plan?
Okay, so the plan is the book that you write after your magical elves fax book also is that book or that book in like 1980 when fax machines actually, or is it like a
No,
fax
that's what's
machine
great is
now?
it's present day.
Okay, so anyway, you are going to write a lit fic book, and I am going to focus on editing for lit fic, and all of my notes are going to be less dialogue, more prose.
More pros. That was kind of your note for Inside Outside. Inside Outside, your note was like, more description, please.
strategic description.
Strategic description. You were like, please don't assume I know how this character is feeling anymore.
Please do not assume that I understand that these two people in the car are in the car.
That wasn't out because you're like, where are they?
Yeah.
I was like, they're in a car. And you're like, how was I supposed to know that? I was like, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So
Oh
we're
man.
gonna work on that. I'm
Ah,
gonna learn to edit lit fic, and you are going to learn how to pick a genre.
what I'm really excited about with the elves is that they're really grumpy and they cuss a lot. Because she first catches, at first she doesn't know who's bringing her clothes every night and like who's like rearranging stuff. And then one night she stays up like a kid staying up to find Santa Claus to see like what's happening. And this little elf enters her room with like her clothes for the next day. And she like tries to engage with it. And its only response is fuck off. That's
I think you are
oh,
really going to
I
enjoy
have
writing that book.
problems.
You are going to
I'm
enjoy
gonna have a
that book.
great time. I'm gonna have a
Oh
great
my,
time plotting it.
you are gonna love writing that book.
Yeah.
Those elves are going to just be
Oh,
so
and
fun for you.
Sexy Tony's totally coming into that book. That is
I
happening.
feel like Sexy Tony is like the elf whisperer.
This maybe. Yeah, Sexy Tony and Popeye are totally coming into that book. Yeah, I have a character planned who is completely unhelpful at all times, who only goes by PMO, which Charlie will find out stands for Prophet of the Most High. But he calls himself PMO.
So he's April Ludgate from Parks and Rec.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Why elves?
Elves are fun. You really want to know why else? I mean, how long do we want to talk about this? I went down a rabbit hole. I was listening to Lore, the podcast, and he did an episode years ago on little people or elves in Iceland and how this is something like Bigfoot that reoccurs around the world. There's all these cultures that are like, hey, there are elves. They live in these places that we don't go, but they exist
I
and
mean,
people cite them all the time.
don't get
And
me wrong.
so,
I love an elf. I
yeah.
love an elf. I don't understand how the elves tie to the fax machine.
So I spent a lot of time. Oh, that's the mystery of the book. I'm not going to give you.
Either make the fax machine the thing or make the elves the thing. Do you need the
Well,
fax machine and the elves?
Charlie is going to like struggle with what is this world she's living in and who is this person she's working for? What is this thing she's working for?
Okay,
That's her like struggle.
I get that. But is she really getting magical facts and being visited by elves?
Yeah, and she lives in a dorm with five other people that are in the same boat that she's in, but none of them actually want to have relationships with each other because every once in a while they die. So they don't want to be around. Like they don't build relationships because their life expectancy is pretty short. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm in if it's all elves or it's all magical faxes. The
Okay,
minute you combine
you're
magical
getting stuck
faxes
on
and
details that don't
elves,
matter.
you lose me.
Magical faxes and elves, reoccurring clothing, grand plans that don't make sense. Her dorm
Okay.
monitor is named Cain, and they wonder if he's the actual biblical Cain.
Okay. So you know how Coco Chanel said when you get dressed and you have accessorized, take off one thing before you leave the house?
Yeah.
That is my advice for you for this book.
I haven't even written it yet. And I'm really only telling you like half the thing. She can leave like post-it notes around and then what she wants appears in the fridge. Like, yeah. Harry Potter had magic and elves.
Harry Potter had magic and elves were part of the magical world. Harry Potter did not live in our world and happen to have a magical fax machine and
Oh,
elves show up at night.
badger me not with details, Laura. I'm just
Okay. You know what, Jeff? This is your vision. If you really want this vision to work, I will help encourage you.
well, I tried it once and it didn't work. So I don't. I tried it once and I read it and I was like, this doesn't work. So we'll see.
So if you take out the magical fax machine and the elves are doing the bidding, and the elves are just whispering to her at night, that makes sense. You don't need the magical fax machine.
Yeah, I like the magical fax machine though.
Yeah. Maybe they're two different stories.
For a while, there was a magical manila folder that had her instructions in it every morning. It wasn't a fax machine, it was a manila folder she opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't change
Does
the
that make it better?
no. It really I love the magical fax machine. I love the elves.
And you love Sexy Tony and Popeye showing
I
up in the book
don't
again.
love Sexy Tony and Papa.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I'm
It's okay.
sorry.
I
I don't.
understand.
I don't. I'm they're
Oh,
they I can understand why other people enjoy them.
I
They're
don't know that I've met anybody that enjoys them. I have I enjoy them. I in nerds I put in a JP let this slide through. There is a cabal of octogenarians that drive Ubers because they don't have anything else to do.
I
They
mean,
also know where all the weed is in town.
I'm
Um,
down with that.
yeah,
I think that works.
that was another fun, weird thing. Sometimes
But
JP
again,
lets things
you're
slide through.
in nerds, you are writing a magical realm,
I am, yeah.
right? When you're
In the last episodes of Nerds, they discover that their opponents, the opposing bureaucracy, the FUCKs, they
you
used
all
to
love
use.
your
We love our
acronym.
acronyms. They used to use Chi-Chi's, the old Tex-Mex restaurant. They weren't real restaurants. They were their satellite headquarters.
You love a Shutter Island.
Yeah, which is why when you went there, the service was always bad because they didn't actually want to be serving you food. They were trying to do their jobs.
I get it. I get it. Oh,
Anyway,
poor Chi-Chi's.
yeah.
All right. Did we answer all the
Are we done?
questions?
I don't know.
I'm exhausted now.
Let's call us done. People stopped
And
listening like an hour ago. They're like,
anyone
what
who
is
made it
happening?
this far,
Oh
please
yeah.
let us know. Because
Yeah. We'll give you some kind of honorary badge for coming
yeah.
for coming this far in the podcast.
An elf will send it to you with a fax
And
machine.
Alf will appear in your room at midnight and change out all your clothes. Um with an
And then
honorary
you'll get a
badge.
magical a fax machine will just end up on your office desk the
Yeah,
next
and give you
evening.
weird faxes. Yeah. And, I mean, I actually did go join a Discord group for fantasy writers because I was like, my magic system in this book that this is not the book I'm writing. This is the book that I'm going to write next. I was like, my magic system doesn't make any sense. So I went and joined a Discord of fantasy writers to figure out.
The funniest thing to me is as a writer and an editor, your biggest thing, and a reader too, your biggest thing is that your rules have to make sense and you have to stick to
Yeah,
your rules.
yeah.
And yet,
I don't practice what I preach.
you do when it comes to dialogue,
Oh, when it comes to dialogue, I do. But
not
when
when
it
it
comes
comes
to
to your rules have to make sense.
not when it comes to not when it comes to writing characters your readers can connect to. I'm like, if
No,
you want to sell books, that's what you should do.
no, we connect to your characters.
Thank you.
You just don't necessarily like them.
All right, I'm gonna hit stop and we're gonna keep going. So I'm hitting stop. Maybe if I can find it.